Well, hi everyone. Tonight on the hot seat, we have our very own Stuart Norman, aka Daryl Stuma, and we're going to be talking about Stu's relationship with Genesis. He's going to talk Genesis. I've got a lot of questions to ask him. So, Stuart, starting with number one, how did you discover Genesis?
Well, Genesis were one of the two or three bands I remember being played in the back of my dad's car. So sat in the back, being blasted, perfect stereo. I'll be getting really the first album was Invisible Touch that I clearly remember as a youngster. I'm going to age myself to being about 6 or 7 years old when that first came out. Yeah, and just it was a sound I'd not heard much like before. Really, it was it was the most progressive and it was the most rocky thing my dad listened to. My mum was the rocker in the family. My dad he listened to Phil Collins and he listened to Tracy Chapman, he listened to Sade, he listened to that kind of thing. It was a bit smoother. And so then when he was playing Genesis, I was like, oh, okay, what's this all about? And that's me, yeah, sat in the back of my dad's car being blasted with Invisible Touch.
Would that have been a Cortina or something like that?
No, this was the 80s. This was in the back of our Porsche 911. No, just kidding. Um, no, but back in the day, my dad worked for a bank, and they gave him a nice car. He had a BMW 5 Series.
Yeah,
That was a pretty cool place to be sitting listening to Genesis. It's a very
but
yuppie.
even when you're 6, 7, it's still going in, isn't it? To
Yeah,
your subconscious
100%.
music.
Yeah, it was.
It's
Yeah, yeah.
it's a thing how it works.
Yeah, it is, and it was a strange sort of serendipity that my dad worked for NatWest Bank back in the day, and then they became heavily involved in uh, I can't remember what it was, promoting, or there was some funding for the 1987 Wembley gig. So Genesis really came to my attention when it turned out that he was going to be involved with that Wembley show. So him and my mum were there in the royal
Jeez.
box. Yeah, it's great. So that's when I was hearing Genesis day after day after day. There was this big exciting new gig coming up, which they were involved in. I can't remember what the capacity was, but there they were, uh, um, doing all that, hanging out with the band with the crew jackets on, and
Didn't
yeah,
your mum get a crew jacket or something? I remember speaking to your mum about this.
she did. Yeah, well, but mum and dad both had that Crew 87 jacket, and unfortunately, we had a major house fire about
That's right, yeah.
15
Yeah.
years ago, and they all went in that. We reckon, so that's pretty sad.
Oh,
Yeah, and the rest.
imagine having that now.
I know, I know.
Yeah.
They'd never see it again. I tell you that.
You could have marked out the in and just add visible touch for like a bit of a makeshift tour jacket for us.
I think
Um,
if I took a Sharpie to it, I'd be in all sorts of trouble, Chris.
uh, fantastic. Stu, question two. Um, you sort of answered that in a way. Um, so that's your earliest memory of listening to Genesis. So when did you when did you start to get into the band more deeply and appreciate the music more?
Yeah, so my musical journey from then on became I was really into hard rock music. I loved Guns N' Roses. I loved Bon Jovi. I loved all that sort of stuff growing up. And I got into heavier stuff in the early '90s, and I started listening to progressive heavy metal bands like Opeth and that kind of thing.
Prog metal.
Prog metal,
Wow.
yeah, yeah, totally. And of course, they're the biggest influence for Opeth is a band called Camel, who I'm a big fan of. So I just sort of look back at the influences of those harder bands that I was listening to, and that brought me back around to Rush and around to Genesis to again. So it's a kind of coming full circle. Thinking, oh, okay, and Rainbow, and Deep Purple and all that sort of stuff. So that put me back into Genesis, and then I went back in time a little bit because I was only really familiar with maybe the Genesis album, the Shapes album, and everything onwards from that. And when I was like a 12, 13-year-old kid, We Can't Dance was massive. But then I started to delve a little bit deeper back into Trick of the Tail and stuff and try and find where are these progressive influences coming from? The stuff I'm listening to now, which is 13-minute, hard rock, heavy metal epics with loads of time changes. I wanted to know where that idea came from, so just tracing it back to those bands. And I was a massive fan of early Rush, all Rush actually. And yeah, that took me to Genesis as well. And that Genesis for me had a little bit more. I don't know. There was something about them which felt a little bit more relatable because they were singing. It was very English. It was very British, and that was again really cool and immediately relatable. So that's my
Does,
coming full circle.
there's a fair bit of Beatles in Genesis, isn't there? And it's funny when I've seen interviews with Tony and the band, how much they loved the Beatles when they were still at Charterhouse and used to go out on lunchtime and buy the latest Beatles single. And I think that really comes through on Genesis Shapes.
Yeah.
That's when they really started to become a chart band, isn't it? I know they'd had hits before, but all of a sudden they were really on MTV and that big explosion. And
Yeah, well, we always say That's All sounds very, very Beatles-esque, doesn't it? It's got a little
yeah,
bit of a lilt. Wow, it's sort of like a country Beatles song. It's funny.
Martha, My Dear, Rocky Raccoon, something like that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah,
something
yeah,
along those lines.
yeah. And it's funny you mentioned Charterhouse as well. Both my brothers were all Carthusians, so that was just another little thing to make me think. Oh, do you know what?
Yeah,
This band is on my patch, and this band is, this. If you relate to a band like that, you feel it's relevant to you if they come from your manor. I used to go swimming in Peter Gabriel's swimming pool as a kid, like over in Chobham, just down the road, because my friends were friends with
yeah.
the family, and it's kind of cool, but it's also just feels like they're speaking your language, and these people represent me in a funny sort of way, and that was kind
They're
of
a bit like the way the Beatles are to me, aren't they? We're living local, and I live practically 5 minutes from John. I can
yeah,
walk there now in five, where he grew up. Is at Mimi's house in Strawberry Fields.
yeah,
It's a bit like you with Genesis, isn't it?
yeah, and there's a sense of
Feels, yeah,
pride and identity about that. Do you know what I mean? You think, oh, these guys are, I can tell everyone in the world, yeah, that really famous band, that's my stock. That's how it feels, and that's a
yeah,
really, really cool thing about music, really.
yeah. Funny. I know this is about you, but just a quick one about the Beatles. The amount, the amount of people in town, older guys, when I've been doing gigs and stuff, who've come up and said, I remember the Beatles first playing down here, Matthew Street and in town, and they were 16, 15, and we'd walk out because they were still learning the chops.
Yeah,
It was like, oh, not the Beatles again. You know what I mean?
yeah,
Before they went to Hamburg. And then
yeah.
when they came back, they'd just done all these gigs and just became, leveled up. But
Well,
yeah, it's interesting.
yeah, I remember hearing. I think it was Ian Pace. It might have been or John Lord talking about that very thing. Is these bands have to be able to cut their teeth, and they have to be able to make mistakes
Yeah,
to get good on the road. And it's really hard for bands to do that now. But it's so important that they do. Imagine if now when the Beatles were trying to learn their chops, those venues didn't exist, and they didn't have the chance to do that. We would have lost one of the most valuable things about Britain and British culture that there is.
yeah,
We really would. So we've got to
yeah.
be careful and make sure those venues still.
Yeah, and this is where we need to have a rain check, with the arts and people who've got that power to release funding for venues because it's so important. It's so important for the future.
Yeah,
Art is so important.
it is.
Okay, moving on, Stu. We'll go to. I've got a question for you here, Genesis related. You asked me this one, but I'm going to ask you it as well, just out of interest. Phil or Peter?
And like you, like you and anyone, I find it incredibly difficult to answer because I have a deep love for both of them. Um, I have to say Phil, I think, and that's just because from an emotional point of view, that's where I fell in love with Genesis, is listening to Phil stuff. And for me, I didn't have that trauma of growing up listening to them and associating them with Peter and then suddenly hearing Phil. I didn't have that. I grew up hearing Phil and then discovered that Peter was a singer before. I knew Peter Gabriel from So and from Sledgehammer. It was only later on when I became a bit older. Oh, really? He was in Genesis. So I can happily say that Phil for me, but I dearly love the stuff that Peter did. But my relationship with that music is a little bit different from my relationship with the
Yeah,
Phil fronted Genesis.
yeah, yeah.
Mm.
So it's you're a little bit in the middle on that one.
Yeah, yeah, but I will come down and
Grey area, isn't it? It's not
yeah,
a it's a bit of a it's not a competition, and yeah, they're both different and offer different things. Okay, a little bit of a question, which is more closer home for you, being a guitar bassist. Um, Steve or Daryl?
ugh. it's it's like the same.
Careful with this one.
No, it's the same thing. I see them. What's I think really really different about Steve and Daryl is that they were, well, in a way there's a big similarity because Daryl had to do a thing for Genesis when they were in a very different place, same way Phil did. If Peter was still singing for Genesis in 79, 80, 81, they never would have done the things they did. Loads of people would
Yeah,
never have heard of the stuff that Peter had done. So Phil did them a massive service. And when Genesis became a band who played stadiums and appealed to the pop audience and that broader base, Daryl did that really, really well. I think he did that and delivered that in a way that Steve wouldn't have been able to do. And I know that's
yeah,
controversial, but if it weren't for the undeniable, just the inspirational way which Steve wrote, played, and set those parameters, then Daryl wouldn't have had anything to work with in the first place.
the
So
body of work wouldn't have been there to pick from, would it?
no, it wouldn't.
Yeah,
Exactly. I think between the two of them, it's a perfect symbiosis of
yeah,
bringing progressive rock to the to the masses. And it's not so simple to call them progressive rock, is it? But
yeah,
I think they could never have had anyone better than Steve to be a part of that songwriting unit and develop what they did. And I can't think of anyone better than Daryl Sturmer to bring that to the
yeah.
stadium rock audience. I can't. So symbiosis.
I think the story of the band went perfectly. I know, people disagree with this. I know. Oh, if he would have stayed, and he would. If you look at it, I think with the moving into the 80s and the way their sound and the way they were changing as writers, I think the people leaving it at that time, it worked out perfectly. For the evolution of
Yeah,
the band. You
yeah.
know,
It's
Daryl and Steve.
it's interesting to think of what would have happened if Steve was still there. Really interesting. I love to think of that, but he didn't. And what happened? What happened was they became a very different live beast. They became, I think,
Mm,
a much more energetic live animal with Daryl there. And I think Daryl changed the dynamic when he came in because he is a bona fide musical wizard, and he understood things. He was sort of on a par with I think Tony in many ways. That meant Tony had someone else to work, someone else on his wavelength and the way he thinks and the way he analyzes stuff. I mean, this is conjecture because I wasn't in those rooms, but that's how I see it. Is that Daryl brought a spark of genius that that really worked well with Tony. And for me, what Steve had was just it's like when me and Martin are on the road and we're learning Genesis tunes and talking about them. He must have learned to play guitar on the moon because how do you think of that stuff? It's so odd,
brilliant, isn't it?
but that's brilliant. And that's what creativity is. He doesn't play any recognized chops. He doesn't just play, blues movements. He does stuff which is genuinely what progressive music should be, pushes the boundaries and has a totally new concept. Daryl
It-
wouldn't have done that.
no, he's making classical guitar fit into a rock field, isn't he? In a way, making
Yeah.
it electric and a great soundsmith.
Yeah.
Those sounds he invented,
Yeah.
and I don't know whether he invented tapping. I don't know. That's like something that's arguable. Django Reinhardt was, or what someone was tapping before. I don't know, but doing stuff like that, he was one of the first innovators of tapping at that time, wasn't he?
Yeah, well,
Definitely.
just of creating really nice melodic lines which counterpoint really, really nicely with
Yeah.
keyboards going on.
Themes.
Yeah,
Themes.
yeah, because
Yeah.
rock guitarists are people like Richie Blackmore, people like my heroes like Jimi Hendrix, and they carry the weight of a rock band. When you're playing in a prog rock band or someone like Genesis, the keys carry the weight, so the guitar has to live
Yeah.
somewhere different. It has to live on the periphery, up here and down here, and
Yeah.
creating beautiful sounds and textures within those. And Steve was
Yeah.
superb at doing that. And I can't think of another guitarist who could have trodden that line quite so well. So that was his true genius. But then Daryl's true genius is to sort of sound like a rock guitarist, but then when you listen to it, and I listen to Daryl's parts and go, huh, wow, that's weird. I've never played that before. And it's really challenging
Yeah.
to try and get your head around his movements. And but it's really, really cool fun.
Very different players, aren't they?
You couldn't be more different. I don't think.
It's they never went for like a copy of Steve, did they, when he left for live?
There isn't one. That's why.
Completely different
No.
types of players, and a lot of different sounds. Daryl's lead sound seems to be a lot less wet, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean the
And
sounds.
reverb and echo.
Yeah, yeah, but yeah, different guys, and I love the way that Daryl interpreted what he did in his own
Yeah,
way.
both absolutely amazing. It's again a question that's very difficult to choose.
Yeah.
Okay, moving on, Stu. Let's see what we've got here. A Genesis song you'd most like to perform that you haven't already with GVT.
Wow. I'd think of a different one every day you asked me that. Honestly, I think I probably would. And
I'll start the clock. I'll start the clock.
We'll play. We already play a lot of the ones I did. I think it's a weird one, but Trick of the Tail. I love it.
Do you know what? I was singing it the other day, and I thought, why has this never been played live?
It's just what a weird, fun, quirky pop song.
It's so catchy, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, it's either that. I always think of that, or I think of Robbery, Assault, and Battery would be great because the stagecraft, the fun we could have with that on stage, Robbery, Assault, and Battery would be really cool.
Because he dressed up as like the robber, didn't he?
Exactly. So just something like that.
Bundle of fivers and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But Trick of the Tail, I was mentioning that to Tony as well, and he was like, you know what? The next time we do an few acoustic shows, let's put it in because there's loads of harmonies in there as well. You know, and you know, I'm not the only singer in the band, so we could. I think we could make that work. I do.
I think so.
No. Put some hours in, we could make that work. I'd love to do it.
Yeah, watch this.
So Trick of the Tail, wow, amazing. Okay, Stu, one more. You asked me this one, which I sort of went around the world and ended up picking two type of thing. But a Genesis Desert Island disc / record that you've got to take to the island. One. I might give it a live one as well, being kind today.
That is... I might, again, go Trick of the Tail.
Yeah.
And I'll say something different and I'll kick myself, but I love Entangled. I love... I think I would go with that. It's got loads of the ones that we play that I really love as well. And I think I found in that album a great point of departure. It just felt like it was quite exciting for them because they had to do something very, very new, I think. And there's somehow that tension kind of comes across when they're thinking.
There's an excitement, isn't there?
Yeah. Who are we? How do we manage this change? And they do it with beauty. They do it with power, and they with squonk, and they do it with grand scale storytelling, and so it's got a bit of everything. I love it.
Brilliant, isn't it?
I'm on a Trick of the Tail day today, so that's what I'm going to go for.
It's one of those albums as well that I mean, Genesis. Funnily, you didn't mention this. They haven't got a Dark Side of the Moon like Floyd have they? Where it's that is singled out as their like masterpiece. But if you were to pick one in the 70s, the most rounded, accessible album without a weak track. I mean, I don't think there's any weak tracks on any of the albums myself, but you'd say Trick, wouldn't you? Probably the most accessible from the 70s.
Accessible,
I would. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it is. And if you're going to be on a desert island, you might want something which takes a lot more listens. So maybe you'd go, Lamb. I don't know, but
yeah.
But
so Trick.
I'm going to stick with it. Yeah.
Wow. What about live? What live album would you take?
3 Sides. I mean, just
would you?
Yeah.
Over Seconds Out.
I would over Seconds Out. Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
I don't know. I don't know why. I guess we've referenced it so much learning our part. So there's it remind me of you guys, Chris, when I'm there withering away, eating crabs and waiting for another coconut to drop down. It remind me of being on the road with Chris, Tony, Martin, and Russ, as I breathe my last. God, what a thought!
Brilliant. Well, Stu. Absolutely amazing. Stu Talks Genesis. I could keep on going with you. Mate, absolutely amazing. It's nice to step in and be the GVT TV host for tonight as well and feel what it likes on the mastermind, the Magnuson chair. And
have I got news for you? Have I got news for you?
So please Remember to subscribe, everyone, to GVT TV. Share, look for our tour dates. And on the next episode, we'll be having, I don't know, will it be Russ? Will it be Tony? Will it be Martin? We don't know. We'll find out who it'll be, and we'll go from there. Cheers, guys. Thanks for tuning in. See you soon.